This meeting is being held in compliance with the Brown Act. SCAG offices are open for members of the public to attend and participate in person. Instructions for providing public comment have been provided in advance and are also included in the agenda packet. If a member of this body is attending remotely but is not at a location specified on the agenda, they may observe and comment as a member of the public, but may not participate in any member discussion or voting of this body. For all members participating remotely, please ensure your microphone is muted when not in use. Please state your name during deliberations and whether making a motion or offering a second. Any voting member or member of the public calling into this meeting by telephone can press *6 to mute and unmute. All telephone participants should identify themselves prior to speaking. SCAG encourages all members of the public to participate in its meetings. We are committed to holding meetings accessible to people with disabilities. For members of the public requiring ADA accommodation, please call 213-630-1410. SCAG offers free interpretation services for members of the public needing information in another language. Please call 213-236-1895. The meeting will now begin.
Good morning, everybody. Today is Thursday, September 4th, 2025. The meeting is now called to order of the Community Economic and Human Development Committee. Welcome to everybody, the thousands in attendance here today and all those virtually as well. Welcome back. As a reminder, if a member of the body is attending remotely but is not at a location specified on the agenda, they may observe and comment as a member of the public, but may not participate in any member discussion or voting of this body. For the Pledge of Allegiance today, I'd like to ask our newest member of the committee, Megan Kerr, to one of our newest members, to lead us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. I'll ask, please, may we confirm the quorum for today's meeting? Madam Clerk?
1 minute.
Okay. We can chat amongst ourselves. Welcome to those who are here. Traffic is, as usual, no fun out there, and I'm sure everybody's had a lot to do. So can we start with announcements now? Over. We have to wait for a quorum. Yeah. While we're waiting for a quorum, does anybody have anything they'd like to share with the committee? Exciting things that happened in our month off while we were all doing nothing, of course, right? Well, I'll share something. It's personal. It's not related to committee business, but I just got back from my son's wedding. He was married in the East Coast. That's our first child. Thank you. And he decided to make it interesting because our daughter, who's been engaged for 1.5 years, is getting married in 2.5 weeks. So 2 weddings. Those are good things, a little bit stressful, but fun. So that's, if I'm smiling a lot, that's probably part of the reason. Also very tired. I don't think I've ever danced that much in my life. They do a lot of dancing there.
2.5 different
I think so.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Good, because I ran out of wedding stories to tell. All right, we have a quorum. I will now open the general public comment period of the meeting. This is the time for members of the public to offer comment for matters that are within SCAG's jurisdiction, but not listed on the agenda. Staff, have we received any public comments after the deadline of 5 p.m. on Wednesday, September 3rd, 2025?
Mr. Chair, we did not receive any written public comments after the deadline.
Okay. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak? Randy? No?
Mr. Chair, I do not see any members of the public wishing to participate online or in person.
Okay. I will now close the public comment period for matters not listed on the agenda. And I will look to the committee members to see if we need to prioritize any of the agenda items. I don't see anyone here wishing to do so. Anyone online? I see a lot of people online in all foreign countries too, including our vice chair. Now we'll move on to the consent calendar. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
Mr. Chair, I do not see any members of the public wishing to participate online or in person.
All right, thanks very much. In order to save time, if anybody wants to pull anything, any of the committee members from the consent calendar, I will ask that we have allow staff to present before moving to the roll call vote for the consent calendar. I don't see any hands up. I have to check virtually. Before we take action on the consent calendar, please note that the attendance section of the minutes needs to be revised to reflect that council member Helen Tran was present at the June 5th, 2025 meeting. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to move to. Okay, we are going to move to approve consent calendar agenda item 1 and receive and file item number 2. Do I have a motion to do so?
Joseph Morbito Wildemar will motion.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have a second?
Second.
And for the record, if you could state your name, please. Thank you. The motion has been made and seconded. Madam Clerk, may we go ahead with the roll call vote?
Yes, thank you. This is for the consent calendar. Item number 1 with the minutes amended as noted, and receive and file item number 2. Cindy Allen, Joe Baca, Debbie Baker,
Aye.
Boyles, Don Caskey,
Aye.
Deborah Doris Parada,
Here. Yes.
Pete Dyke, Shauna Elias, Bob Engler, Rose Espinosa,
Aye.
Berman, Margaret Finley, Martin Fuentes,
Yes.
Victoria Garcia, Gary Gardner, Mike Goodsell,
Yes.
Raz, Mark Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson, can you tell me if you're at a notice location? I have
I'm not
you.
at a notice location. So that's right. I can't vote. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peggy Wong,
Aye.
Cecilia Hupp, William Hussey,
Yes.
Linda Johnson, Megan Kerr,
Aye.
Matt Levere,
Yes.
Chad Leano, Annie Marshall, Betty Martinez Franco.
Aye.
Thank you. Andrew Macio, John Marish,
Yes.
Joseph Morbito, Rocky Rhodes,
Yes.
Sheila Rossi, Sonny Santinez,
Yes.
Dan Shapiro,
Yes.
Becky Shevlin,
Yes.
Mary Solorio, Helen Tran. And I show Council Member Valerie Vandiver online. Are you at a notice location?
Yes.
Mark Burnett,
Aye.
Jeff Wood, Judy Wilsey, Tony Wu.
Yes.
Okay, and I see Frank Yokoyama, you're online.
Yes,
And ano-
I vote yes, and I'm here with Martin Fuentes at the notice location in Avalon, California.
Great, thank you.
Excuse me, my name is not called.
I'm sorry, who's speaking?
John Grass, Imperial SCAG office.
Oh, yes, I did. I will repeat it. John Grass,
Aye.
thank you. Frank Zaranian and Jesse Zwick. Thank you. The consent calendar passes with 23 yes votes, 0 no votes, and 0 abstentions.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there something going on in Avalon we should know about, former chair? We weren't invited.
Yes, Mr. Chair, there is a Gateway COG conference.
Wonderful. Enjoy. All right, we'll move on. Item number 3. Today we're lucky to have a panel on shared equity homeownership models. Connect SoCal 2024 features regional planning policies for increasing homeownership across our region, especially in communities that have been historically impacted by redlining and other systemic barriers to homeownership. Shared equity homeownership programs create a means for individuals and families with qualifying incomes to become homeowners at below market prices. Today, we received presentations on 2 different shared equity programs. The first panelist is Margie Brown, Executive Director for the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board, or UHAB. For 50 years, UHAB has empowered low and moderate income tenants to take control of their housing and become homeowners in the buildings where they already live. Ms. Brown will present information on UHAB's programs. Ms. Brown, please begin your presentation and welcome. You may have to unmute.
Yeah, hi. I think I'm good now. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Margie Brown. As you said, I'm Executive Director here at UHAB, the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board. I have been Executive Director here for about 2.5 years, very short in UHAB's overall lifespan of about 52 years. But before I came to UHAB, I also had a long career in government. I worked in city government in New York City for over 22 years. So it's really nice to be presenting here to government colleagues. Thank you again so much for having me. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. There we go. So our mission at UHAB is around empowering residents and communities to take control of their housing. And this really spans everything from basic know your rights training to tenant organizing to the creation of co-ops. We really focus on organizing both tenants and shareholders to come together to be able to be active participants in their housing. And this really stems from a very basic mission that we believe housing works best when residents are in charge. The idea that that renters as well as homeowners are really active participants and knowledgeable about their rights in housing and are driving how the housing operates and works. We tend to think of kind of this dichotomy, I think overall, or generally people think of this dichotomy between homeowners as being really in control of their housing, and renters being more passive. But not only are there so many models of ownership that are different than rental and kind of traditional one single family home ownership, but there is really a need for people across those spectrums of models of home ownership or of models of housing to be involved and to be pushing toward housing outcomes that are positive for them. We strongly believe that democratic control and informed residents move us closer to having safe, affordable, and healthy housing for everyone. Most of our work, what we're kind of best known for, is around affordable co-ops. And I want to talk a little bit about what affordable co-ops are and kind of the even the terminology. We often hear shared equity housing and limited equity housing. At UHAB, we tend to talk most about affordable co-ops, which really are both those things. They are shared equity in that they are a cooperative community control model, and they are limited equity in that they are restricted sales prices for the long term to both allow entry for people of low and moderate income and to ensure that they remain affordable on an ongoing basis and serve people of future generations. With regard to the terminology, why do we focus on saying like affordable co-ops rather than particularly limited equity? And limited equity, we support that it is limited equity housing. Limited equity tends to be kind of the most controversial aspect of affordable co-ops in that there is such an emphasis on the wealth building power of homeownership. And we really believe that homeownership, even as an affordable co-op, can and should be wealth building. But that wealth building is not necessarily just in the long-term equity of selling the home. We really believe in the value of a home as living in it and being able to maintain affordability while you're in that home. Traditional home ownership tends to emphasize the power of wealth building in selling the home, but to make sure that people have affordable cost of living while they are in that home so that they can build equity and just be able to afford their everyday lives while they are actually living there. Part of the value and stability that affordable co-ops offer. So thinking about like what it offers to the household in terms of stability, less risk than traditional single-family home ownership, in that there is less upfront investment and that the costs of operating the housing over time are shared. The democratic participation of being able to really govern the housing and control the outcomes that traditional family homeownership also offers, but for it to be more affordable. And then on the community side, of course, the affordability for people and communities over the long term, and particularly the increased rates of home ownership that it is able to offer in that there is a lot less expense to creating the housing than there is for traditional single-family home ownership, in which the upfront costs are overall more expensive, and in where there is government's participation in that, it tends to be kind of like one and done. The value of it is really to one single family if it is not preserved for future generations as limited equity. So just a little bit about UHAB's history, because I think that it helps to inform the model, how the model works, as well as like where we came from. So UHAB was formed about 52 years ago in the 70s when the rates of arson and abandonment and city disinvestment in housing was just rampant. I'm so glad that, Chair, that you had brought up the history of redlining in leading to that. It is a very clear pattern, particularly when you look at the map of where city disinvestment was, where affordable co-ops exist today, and like tracing that back to the history of redlining. The rates of foreclosure in those neighborhoods in the 70s were rampant, and the policy of city foreclosure for tax non-payment, and then what ended up to be just a really poor decision in the end in New York City. The city actually took ownership of that housing initially with the idea that they could turn around that housing and sell it for a profit to make up for some of that tax revenue loss. Because there was so much disinvestment and abandonment, and those neighborhoods were in such poor condition that housing really had negative value. There's a lot of information on the investment that the city actually ended up putting into that very poor policy. Over time, on average, the city ended up owning those units for about 19 years and spent about $1 million per unit just in maintenance of that housing. But it still remained, the rehab needs of that housing were so deep that it remained in very poor shape. And those neighborhoods took so long to recover from that. So the homesteading movement was really about tenants coming in and either where they already occupied that housing or moving into buildings that were abandoned and taking ownership of that housing and helping to rehab that housing and make it occupiable homes. Was really what the homesteading movement was. The Urban Homesteading Assistance Board grew out of that and became incorporated as a nonprofit organization. And just kind of an interesting piece of history, the term sweat equity was coined by UHAB during that time. You hear the term sweat equity across so many different industries now, and not just housing, but sweat equity really came out of the homesteading movement and from UHAB of people taking charge of the housing and making it into occupiable homes. In the late 70s, the city partnered with UHAB to create programming around getting those units back into responsible ownership. So the city had tax foreclosed on them, and then how to have actual mechanisms to transfer that housing to the ownership of tenants. Over time, that programming kind of grew into where the city actually funded that as well to make sure that the housing was really had enough rehab to occupy it and to make it more stable over the long term. Through all of those programs, about 25,000 units of housing in about 1,200 co-ops have been developed citywide. And UHAB played a role in just about all of those units. Earlier on, it was really more the sweat equity model, and UHAB provided training in terms of how to both do rehab and how to form a co-op and manage that housing over the long term. Later, those programs were more development centered because they really required deeper development, particularly as those buildings had sat in abandonment for a longer amount of time. So UHAB then took on the role of becoming an actual housing developer and receiving a subsidy from the city to be able to help to do that and to still keep tenants involved in the prioritization of like what the rehab looked at like and the model of ownership that they actually took on. And so over time, we have developed about served as actual developer on about 100 co-op projects with about 2,000 units. And aside from the role of just creating co-ops, We help to serve co-ops over the long term with technical assistance and training that's open to co-ops citywide. The role of technical assistance and training in resident-controlled housing is so important because the having an informed body of shareholders or of tenants is absolutely essential to making sure that tenants have a role in the housing, and that that you have people ready to step up into board positions at any time. Democracy, of course, is reliant on having new people step into elected positions, the boards, and so to have an informed residency and informed citizenry there is so important. Just for a little bit more on the landscape of cooperative housing in New York City. Again, there are about 25,000 homes in 1,200 co-ops across the city that are in what we call housing development fund corporations. Those are primarily the co-ops that you have involved in creating. They're smaller sized buildings. The average is about 20 units. They range from as small as 3 units to as large as about 300, but the average is about that 20 unit size. We also have in New York City Mitchell-Lama co-ops. Mitchell-Lamas were new construction that were created between 1955 and 1981. Mitchell and Lama were two senators that created state legislation to build those buildings and funding behind that. Those are much larger co-ops. Ranging from 100 to 15,000 units. If you've heard of Co-op City in New York, that is the 15,000 unit one. It is really like a small city. I think it's home to about 50,000 residents overall. But much larger developments and approximately 63,000 units created over those couple of decades. You may be interested to know how much co-op housing there is in across the US and Canada. I was surprised to learn this. There are about 190,000 units of cooperative housing across the US and another 67,000 in Canada. And I should say that these are ones with some type of affordability. So in some cases, that is much closer to naturally occurring affordability, in which it is really they were developed in lower income neighborhoods and may either still be in lower income neighborhoods, so the market value really hasn't exceeded that. But in all of these, they are affordable for the neighborhood, and in the vast majority of them, there is some either in the cooperative structure or by some sort of regulatory structure. There is the commitment to remaining affordable over the long term. For all of you who are in government, I wanted to share a little bit about the role of government in cooperative housing and how that works, at least in New York State, and how we see it play out in some form pretty much around the country. So first, the role of state government. In most places, the role of state government is really around what cooperative corporations look like. And so in New York State, cooperative homeownership, those are all business corporations and operate as it sounds like there is a tension between that they are limited equity and they are for-profit corporations, but they are businesses that are meant to operate on a budget-based model. And in that corporation requirement, there for limited equity or for affordable ones, there are also requirements in terms of how those operate to remain affordable. So the corporation law is very important at the state level. Also, related to the corporation law, this concept of like what people need to know, what corporations need to disclose, as people are making the decision to purchase into a co-op. And so that's generally referred to as the offering plan. And so the state role in governing what is required to get into the offering plan and the various disclosures that co-ops are required to make is a very important aspect, again, of community control, that people need the information and need to be able to have that both to purchase in and to operate their cooperative. And then there are also, again, around operations, requirements in terms of operating rules and how the corporation actually works, disclosures, meeting procedures, etc. The role of municipal government, particularly in New York City, is largely around the development programming. So what are the priorities for the area in terms of what is meant to be achieved? So in New York City, most of our co-op housing is low and moderate income. There is some that is specifically low income. And so who are the populations served? Kind of as a corollary to that, what is the regulatory structure then to achieve that over the long term and make sure that there is long-term or permanent affordability there? And then also subsidizing that development, and what those subsidies look like often have to do with the level of affordability that is in there. Deeper affordability tends to come with deeper levels of subsidy that are needed, but also tend to achieve really deep and meaningful policy goals of making sure that homeownership opportunities are available to those that are typically shut out of the private market, and also to make sure that it's achieving equity goals, racial equity goals, in making sure that homeownership rates among people of color are able to come closer, or to that we're making progress toward achieving more equitability across the racial divide of homeownership. So those policy goals are so important. Real estate tax exemptions, I have those on municipal government because those are typically implemented by municipal government, and again, policy goals are set there. In New York State, for property tax exemptions, there does need to be state enabling legislation to implement real estate exemption at the local level. But the impetus for that does tend to come from the local level, and the petitioning for state enabling legislation, and then the implementation of it at the local level. Another role of municipal government is, there is all this corporation law that the state government puts in place, but there are so many rules around that that require municipal interpretation. So promulgating of rules to be able to implement that at the local level, and particularly it's to come in line with the regulatory structures that are put in place.
Hi, Margie. Sorry
sorry.
for you, Margie. This is Elizabeth with SCAG. If I could have you please start summarizing the slide so we can transition to the next presentation, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And so for you have, of course, this is the most important part, but what the role of the nonprofit is in here. And I've touched on a lot of this already, but I will say that we have a large contract with the City of New York to be able to provide services to cooperative housing over the long term, both training and technical assistance. So I had talked about our co-op development and the subsidies that we receive to be able to develop co-ops on an ongoing basis. The training and technical assistance. So this is, again, the contract that we have with the city. We also have smaller contracts with the state and get philanthropic funding to do this as well. But we have trainings that are open to co-ops across the city on all sorts of topics related to governance and physical and financial management, everything from broad, like managing a property manager, to very, very bespoke issues, like one of my favorite examples is bed bugs. Who pays for bed bug remediation in the context of a co-op? But having informed shareholders and boards is so important on these topics to be able to have effective management. We also do monitoring of regulatory agreements to make sure that co-ops stay in compliance with their affordability restrictions and other requirements that are in those. And also technical assistance to just help co-ops understand the very, very complicated landscape of regulatory compliance, compliance with all sorts of local laws that go into place. It is difficult for very sophisticated building owners to keep in compliance with all of those things. So for regular residents to have an avenue to be able to get that information and in a digestible way, so important. We have a co-op improvement program that specifically helps struggling co-ops to get back on their feet. Another thing that we provide is share loans. We are a CDFI. It's very difficult for co-op purchasers to go out and on the open market get loans from banks for the purchases of co-ops. Banks, even for market rate co-ops, tend to frankly price gouge on those. And so once you add in the layer of this is affordability and it's a co-op, it doesn't compute for your typical lender. And so to have a loan source that is appropriately sized and priced for affordable co-ops is so important. Lastly, we do a lot to create cooperation among cooperatives so that there is peer-to-peer learning and fostering community amongst what is like kind of such a niche model to make sure that people have the collective voice and the collective mutual learning to be able to work together and to learn from each other. We also do a lot of bulk purchasing for co-ops and bring co-ops together to cooperatively purchase some of their largest expenses like fuel and insurance. Again, those are things that can be so much more expensive and so difficult to navigate for individual buildings. That is a role that we help to play to bring people together and to do that cooperatively. I'll stop there. I hope that was helpful in terms of our role and the type of co-ops that are here in New York and the type of support that we see as really necessary to make cooperative housing possible for low-income communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie. And we will come back to you. I know there are some questions, but we're going to, in essence of time, we're going to go ahead with our second panelist. Hopefully you can stay on. The second panelist is Devin Culbertson, Vice President of the Innovative Finance Grounded Solutions. Mr. Culbertson will present information on the Homes for Future Initiative, HFFF, which invests in preserving affordable single-family homes for renters and buyers in growing American cities. Mr. Culbertson, you're welcome to begin your presentation.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me. And just to confirm, how much time do we have?
15 minutes, but we know there'll be lots of questions for both of you.
Excellent. I'll use it judiciously. Can you all see my presentation okay?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, well, thanks so much for having us here and letting us both kind of talk about our different approaches to shared equity. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Grounded Solutions Network, kind of how we work, but spend most of my time talking about the Homes for the Future initiative, which is really kind of focused on a specific lane where we see a lot of opportunity, and I think is really relevant for folks who are thinking kind of structurally and systemically about housing affordability and the availability of that over the long term. So to start with, Grounded Solutions, we're a network of about 250, 280 now organizations, and that really runs the gamut from folks who are community-based organizations and community land trusts, local governments who are working on putting together the programmatic and funding infrastructure to scale those programs. We work with foundations, we work with lenders and CDFIs that are trying to build products that make sense for this market. We work a lot with the GSEs and making sure that there's good mortgage availability for community land trust and shared equity homes. And then we also raise capital and do work directly. So we have a broad subset of members. We support them with technical assistance, with strategy development. Some of that's contractually based, some of that's in direct partnership where we're co-investing. And so we really roll a lot of that knowledge and experience into some of the strategic work we do to think about how we might roll out something new that's additive and helpful for growing the field overall. I'll say that we do take as a member organization, we are not necessarily frontline with community groups. We have that membership infrastructure that typically does that, and so we're working in partnership with them to scale the work that they're doing and think about that portfolio growth. And so our goal is really to think nationally about the portfolio of shared equity homes and homes with lasting affordability, and think about growing that over the long term. One thing I will say about the shared equity model, just to add to Margie's comments, and thanks so much for kind of setting that up, and it saves me some time, is that we really believe in housing with lasting affordability and housing that with wealth creation potential. And by our math, we really see a lot more wealth creation potential in shared equity than in fee simple, and it's somewhat ironic to say that, but it depends on who you are, right? If you're thinking about the wealth creation for that first homeowner, there's a difference. But thinking systemically, thinking long term, thinking about how you create community wealth over decades or if not generations, you really see a lot more wealth creation when that capital isn't mobile when the first owner sells. And so that's one of the reasons why we really like thinking in partnership with place-based organizations and public governments who really have that long view in mind. So when we think about Homes for the Future, we were asked by our members who are in 46 different states to come up with a way that they could grow those portfolios without being so reliant on the cash NOFAs and the cash subsidy from their local governments every year. They were saying that those NOFAs sometimes are increasing modestly, sometimes are shrinking, but in no place were they saying that they're keeping pace with the increase in housing costs. And so what they said is, as our national network, can you create a different model for us? Help us find a way to expand through a different channel. No surprise to you all, you see a lot of the markets there in Southern California are some of the most expensive in the country, which makes it really, really difficult to do a lot of the work that we do in those places. So you'll see a lot of examples, and a lot of the things that I show on my map are not in that footprint. But toward the end, I've got some ideas of how we can start to change that, as I think is all of our mutual goal. It's really important too that when we think about trying to do something different and trying to expand the way we we grow this portfolio, that we're doing it in the context that we've been in the last several years. One of the biggest pieces when we think about single family and home ownership is the institutional single family rental investors that have really been kind of the disruptive force in that segment of the housing market in a way that we hadn't seen before. The mom and pop single family operation that existed really before the Great Recession is not the landscape that we're in now, and it certainly isn't the most efficient way to think about single family rental operation. And so a lot of our work has been focused on understanding that industry, understanding the leverage points of how we utilize the infrastructure that's been built for private investment and use that on the mission-driven side to equal advantage. Time and place really matter, and that timing moves. So we've seen markets where we really see an opportunity, but the capital isn't quick enough on the mission side, and that what seems good in 2022, you've missed the moment by 2024. And so there's really this question of how you sort of get to the right place at the right time, but move with enough urgency that you can actually take advantage of what you've spotted in terms of opportunities. And lastly, that in the last several years, there's been a lot of growth and change in the impact capital space, right? We've seen ESG funds kind of grow and then take a step back. But there's still a lot of folks that are really asking this question of what's between a grant and a loan? What's between demanding market rate returns and never seeing that dollar again? And so we're exploring that in partnership with a lot of different investors and foundations. So really the headline here, what is Homes for the Future? What am I going to talk to you all about is an investment strategy that's really focused on acquiring single family homes and using the power of the market over time to replace the cash subsidy or stretch the cash subsidy that would otherwise be required of local government. We really look at renting in places where the economy is strong, where income growth is strong, holding those as rentals for up to 10 years, and then selling those into shared equity so that we're accumulating equity, we're repaying our investors, but we're retaining the bulk of that equity in communities to keep those homes affordable for the long term. The model generally of how we do that, I'll go over a couple of slides. From the timeline perspective, it starts with really partnering with those single family rental operators that have scaled their business, that have the national purchasing contracts, that have sometimes thousands of units in a city, and so they've got their own internal fleet of vans and service providers, and leveraging their ability to acquire, to rehab, and to operate those homes in a way that's really cost effective and is currently benefiting their investors and could benefit impact investors as well. So we raise a fund through a subsidiary of Grounded Solutions, the Homes for the Future Fund. We invest in partnership through those organizations in the same way that their other investors do, and ask them to acquire, rehab, and operate on our behalf so that those homes stay in mission control. We operate those for, like I said, for a period of up to 10 years. And during that time, we're supporting the tenants, but those folks are tenants. It's not a rent to own. It's not an expectation that tenant will be there for 10 years and buy on the back end. There's a rental period for that home and an ownership period for that home. So again, we're thinking about the infrastructure of available homes, not necessarily just that one family and how they move from renting to owning. So toward the end of that time, we get to the place where I'll get into the financials a little bit, but we've amortized enough capital that we can sell those homes affordably. And at that point, we are working with local partner organizations who are present at the outset, who really advise on location and what kind of product and what the needs are that they're looking for to expand their portfolio. But on the back end, we're selling to those folks at a discount so that they can hit an affordable price point and retain that subsidy over the long term. And so that's how we're targeting home ownership. We move out of the rental phase. That's in that 60 to 80% AMI range. This is kind of as deep as we'll go into the financials, and we try to make it pretty clear and graphic. But ultimately, this is sort of the premise of the model, right? Is that in that gold line you have the market rate cost of housing. This is the standard graphic, not in Southern California. I'm aware of that. So you have a market rate cost of housing in the gold line that that in strong markets is going to continue to increase. Affordability in a lot of places is below that, right? And so we're really focused in places where that affordability gap is typically in the $50,000 to $75,000 range. And so folks are priced out of the current market. So what we're able to do in those look at those beige bars, or at least beige on my screen, is we're raising capital to acquire that home at the market price. We're renting that and amortizing and paying down the loan just like you do with a single family mortgage or anything else, amortizing that over time. But we're careful to buy in places where there's also strong income so that purchasing power increases over time. And so by the time you get into those out years 9 and 10, you're at the place where you can sell affordably, which is kind of below that blue line, repay your capital with a return, and still offer someone a home that's affordable with a significant discount to market that makes sense for shared equity. I won't spend a ton of time on the shared equity piece, but really the premise here is that it really is this balance where we can keep something affordable over the long term and allow someone to create household wealth over time, and that it's really a matter of kind of splitting those things rather than having kind of all of one or all of the other. It really is kind of a third path between owning and renting in a lot of ways. The challenge is that it almost always requires this initial public subsidy, which limits how many homes you can do in a market because it's really limited by what the public budgets can provide. In the places where there are active portfolios and active members, we see huge demand for shared equity. So it's not a question of whether or not people want it or whether or not folks who are currently renters would like the opportunity to be at a single family home where they also create equity. It's really limited by what we can find in the subsidy to grow those portfolios. So the alternative here is the fund investment that comes in, acquires those homes, controls that supply, and ultimately exits and sells at a discount to replace that public subsidy. Now, I mentioned in that bar chart that those numbers that I show are not representative of Southern California housing costs, right? And so this works in a lot of places that are in the Southeast and the Midwest and have a much lower sort of cost of home ownership. But also importantly, it's the cost of that acquisition relative to the cost of renting. And so when you look at those, sort of what the costs are, what the rents are, and where you can buy and rent something, the map is really stark, particularly when you start talking about the higher cost coastal places. But the question that leaves us with is not where does Homes for the Future work, but how do we make it work more places, right? And so there's the standard model that assumes no public subsidy, no public partnership. It really is about sort of finding the right market, raising charitable impact capital, and making those acquisitions. So what we've been looking at more recently is how we partner to stretch that map, to cover more places that have the affordability needs, but don't quite have the market dynamics that I described going in the previous slides. So, and we're finding a lot of options and opportunities there. There's certainly sort of the project-based vouchers in that rental phase and ways that the housing authority partnerships and things like that can help sort of solve on the rent side of the equation. We're also looking at certainly states that have property tax exemptions either for nonprofit owners or for community land trusts, which some states have that as a specific option. Of late, we've been looking at a lot of portfolio sales from mission owners. So some of those are housing authorities that are needing to sell off their single family portfolios to fund other projects. Some of those are CDCs that have just outgrown being focused on much smaller units and are moving into larger scale projects. So we've been looking at some of those to be able to buy those on favorable terms and still get them the capital that they need. We've been looking at some public land partnerships, and those would be for new construction. But it's a way to lower the cost basis overall in a way that we just couldn't get to in acquiring on the open market. One of the things we spent a lot of time with, particularly folks in the Texas markets that are really using their municipal issuance authority really creatively, is ways to lower the cost of capital that's really through that municipal issuance and doesn't ask for a cash or asset contribution from that public partner. So it really is a way to grow the pie by accessing the public markets for better capital cost. And then intentionally last on this list is that it is this sort of either a cash subsidy or a soft debt that we tend to shy away from because we really don't want to be in direct competition with all the other affordable housing needs that are often competing for those resources at the local level. But it is a way to make some of this work. So the last thing I'll say is just kind of about where we are with this strategy. We've made our first investment in the Twin Cities. We're working on a second in Atlanta, and we're really sort of in this sort of kind of learn and iterate phase. And as I mentioned, sort of figure out where we can, what kinds of transactions and what kinds of structures really open on and unlock the national map a little bit better, and allow us to support and undergird those local organizations that are ultimately going to own this housing for the long term. But we do see a lot of opportunity to sort of prove that out, build on those efficiencies, and start to scale this over time. Like I said, we're really thinking about the national volume of homes that are affordable as rental and as shared equity home ownership. And so we see ultimately our goal and the goal of the partnerships that we pursue is really with folks that are thinking about that overall portfolio scale and looking to scale sort of what's available to the folks in their communities. So I'll just leave it there and see what questions might come up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Culbertson. And let me go ahead and open this up for public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this particular item?
Mr. Chair, I do not see any members of the public wishing to participate online or in person.
Okay, I will now entertain comments from members of CEHD. I will go ahead with in-person speakers, and then we will proceed to those online. If you are online and wish to ask a question, make a comment, please raise your hand because you're all muted at this point in order to allow the meeting to proceed as smoothly as possible. So thanks for that. We will start with the Honorable John Murish to begin the questioning.
Thanks so much. And I have a question for each of the presenters. And I'll go backwards. I'll start with Devin first. A couple of questions. We're hearing the narrative, certainly in California, that people no longer want to live in single-family homes and they don't want to own their own homes, and that more people would prefer to be renters in small to mid-size apartments. Is this, according to what you know, a false narrative?
You know, I can't really speak to sort of where the local preferences are in any given market. I think where we're focused is just making sure that there's housing choice to meet those preferences. And so, you know, often in the space where we're working, the market share is so small relative to the demand that we don't feel like we're at risk of oversupplying that segment of the market. But yeah, I think that would really depend on kind of what's going on locally in the communities that you serve and the folks you're talking to.
So you mentioned institutional investors, and then you ask the question, why are people being priced out? That would seem to imply, and I certainly would agree with that institutional investors are part of the reason that real families who want to own homes and build generational wealth are being priced out because there's no way for them to compete with institutional investors. My question to you would be, shouldn't we be, and I know this is something I've mentioned for years and years, looking to anti-speculation housing policy that would curb some of this, these incredible increases in prices that are driven by institutional investors? Wouldn't that help then you in your mission to allow real families either to fee simple or to have a shared equity to allow more real people to who actually want housing to live in rather than as an investment vehicle? Wouldn't anti-speculation housing policies also help you in your mission?
They may, and they might cut both ways. I mean, I think that from our perspective, like the investor motivations, large and small, are pretty consistently profit driven. I think that where we find partnerships with the institutional scale investors, that they're also increasing efficiency and lowering the operating cost. So, you know, I think that we've rather than trying to sort of kind of restructure the playing field in the way that you described, we've looked to sort of how to leverage sort of the existing disruption that's happening. But But it seems like, yeah, there's certainly some question for what the policy environment might do to kind of reshape the growth trajectory of rents.
And I know, just so you know, since you're not maybe as familiar with what happens in California, there have been efforts. I know that the city attorney of LA unfortunately had a bill that had a great bill that was not carried, I guess, because of the influence of special interests in Sacramento that would apply um, that would apply anti-cartel measures, if you will, or antitrust measures to housing as well in a more comprehensive way that would stop collusion and this sort of thing. And anyway, I'm just be aware that I think that's something that at least some of us have been discussing, that if we believe that homes are for living in primarily and not primarily an investment vehicle, there should be policies to reflect that. And that hopefully could help what you're doing. And I just want to say I support what you're doing and would support it even more by making it more feasible for more families to have either shared equity or fee simple home ownership. I do believe that that's what, and actually there are even studies. Karen Shapley from Berkeley did one about what people prefer, and I guess I feel in California people still do prefer that. But thank you. My second question is going to be for Margie. I appreciate your model as well. I've been talking about, we've been talking about TOPA and COPA programs for a number of years. I proposed one in my city, Beverly Hills, unfortunately did not get support from the council, but I'm also on the La Casa board. La Casa is the Los Angeles County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency, which is a new state mandated agency that finally got funding to try to stop people from falling into homelessness. And the focus there is on 3 Ps: production, protection, and preservation. But some of us have emphasized ownership. So we've added an O to that, and that includes shared equity. And I've spoken a lot about COPA and TOPA measures. Could you talk about that? I know you're based in New York, but how might those be models that we could look at in Southern California as well to implement here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought up TOPA and COPA. Those are initiatives in New York that UHAB has been really involved in, and that we really see as kind of the next frontier of how to create shared equity housing and affordable co-ops. The pipeline of available buildings that the city had at one time tax foreclosed on and need to be transferred into private ownership, and that was an avenue to create cooperative housing that is really pretty much dried up. But it is very similar to say that that when buildings are up for sale, that tenants or community organizations have the first right of purchase to those. To be able to create community-controlled housing and resident-controlled housing is just really looks like the new frontier. And so I'm so excited to hear that you are championing those in California as well. And I think it ties into your point about people on a greater scale kind of rejecting the idea of single-family home ownership and home ownership that is oriented toward wealth building. There is so much risk in single-family home ownership, and Devin made the point that what your equity building potential and your stability in single-family home ownership looks very different depending on where you are on the income scale. When we see rates of foreclosure and rates of people filing into mortgage arrears, those rates we think of as kind of just general spread across the income scale, when in fact they are not. They are highly concentrated in toward the lower end of the spectrum. And so for people to be saying that is risk that I do not want to take on is very rational. And so to make sure that we have ways to create multifamily home ownership and more affordable home ownership through programs like TOPA and COPA is really an enormously important public policy goal.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Shauna Elias.
Hi, thank you both for your presentations. My question is for Margie. You, in your presentation, referenced your community-controlled model, and you made two comments that I am hoping you can expand on a little bit. You first said the cost of maintaining the home over time is shared, which I want you to expand on that one. And you mentioned that there's less expense to creating this housing. I'd like for you to expand on that as well.
Yeah, sure. Just in terms of shared costs and shared risk, there are in multifamily homeownership and particularly where people are constrained in terms of their costs into housing, to have that risk and cost dispersed over a democratic body of people who both can make decisions about budgeting and are not, again, just the risk of single family home ownership of something going wrong with a building and that being the sole responsibility of an individual to bear. And even the structure of a single family home versus like multi-family home, for that it can bear less risk and less expense. And so just the kind of like collective model and the tend to be more solid structures, even in multifamily, both mitigate that risk. And I'm sorry, can you repeat the second portion?
You mentioned that there's less expense to creating this housing in this model.
Sure. So the part of it is kind of like the long-term underwriting of it. And certainly depending on the type of building that you are creating or rehab at the level of rehab needed is going to go into what the expense is to actually create that. But in the long-term underwriting of a shared equity model, there can be a few things that kind of like come out of there that you would see in a developer or a for-profit owner model. One of those is just, what is the profit? And so, you tend to see a profit margin of on an annual basis written into underwriting for rental housing that is owned by a for-profit owner. And so there's extraction of value that's happening there. And when you look at that over, like, if we're talking about a 30-year mortgage, that's expensive. Also, in shared equity housing, there are some models in which the people themselves take on management of the building, or at least management of certain aspects of the building, and some in which they fully use a property manager for really all physical and financial needs. Where there is a portion of that is managed by the co-op itself, that is a savings. And we really believe in democratic control for and democratic decision making for the co-op to say, like, what is best for this co-op. But our role of providing training on physical and financial management of buildings, we see as really important, again, to just long-term savings. And as you're looking at what is the subsidy needed to develop a project, if you are recognizing that savings in the initial underwriting, that can be a real savings in terms of the subsidy that is required to go into that development.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Tanya Dolby.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank you both for your presentations, and it's obvious the level of passion that you have. I can feel it from there to here. I have a ton of questions, but I think that they could be perfectly encapsulated by asking, how would these projects translate to Sunshine, California? Because it looks like they're back east and even New York. And I'm gonna just be honest with you, I'm not gonna speak for my colleagues, but I've got the attention span of a gnat. So if you could give me like a commercial, no more than a minute, answer my question, it would be very powerfully understood by me. Thank you in advance.
I can start, and Deb and I will certainly open that up to you as well. But part of why I wanted to show the national map is because, frankly, when I started doing more of this work on toward the co-op side, as opposed to various types of things I did in housing and government, I was really surprised at how much affordable cooperative housing already exists. And so one thing that I would say is that it does exist in California, and what the models of that are would be very interesting to dig into. But I will say that in terms of developing new, I really do think that the opportunity for it is in the TOPA and COPA programs. There is new development of housing that can be done, and so looking at that for municipalities to incorporate into their policy goals in terms of new development. You have, I hope from the presentation you can see that we are primarily focused on preservation and being able to create the opportunities for renters and for low-income communities who already are in their housing to become homeowners in the buildings where they already live. And so the TOPA and COPA avenue to that, I would say, is a very compelling model, and kind of, I think, where the frontier on that is.
Thank you very much. And just double checking, there are no hands raised online. So we will move on. Thank you for those excellent reports. And in the interest of time, we'll move on to our next report, Demographic Data Update. SCAG is a long-standing leader in providing local data and understanding long-run regional trends. This is rooted in Connect SoCal's understanding of who we're planning for. Within CEHD's purview lie many programs and policy areas that require having an up-to-date understanding of the region's people, housing, and jobs, both today and where they're heading in the future. With that in mind, and with Connect SoCal 2050 development right around the corner, I'll now turn it over to Dr. Kevin Kane, supervisor of SCAG's Demographics and Growth Vision program, to provide a brief update on the region's demographics. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of CEHD. Good morning, and thanks for having me here. Demographic trends kind of impact all of our planning, but as you'd mentioned, really, they most directly impact the policies and programs that flow through this committee here. So once a year or thereabouts, I kind of come and put my demographer hat on, the SCAG demographer hat on, and provide a quick annual update of where we are as a region. So what's critical for understanding Southern California right now? I'll tell you where we are from those recent statistics, which are frankly January 2025 population and housing, but also mid-year housing production updates. The other point that I'd kind of like to make, because it seems to continue coming up when you look at various components of growth, whether it be population, pieces of population, housing, what have you, is that by virtue of being a metropolitan planning organization, we really focus a lot more in our forecasting efforts on balance, not just a pure population forecast, but on balance between population, employment, and households. We have a responsibility in our plans to model and to envision a future where there's a plausible number of homes for the people, and there's enough people to do the jobs that we anticipate having here. So it's a little bit of a different approach than just kind of a pure forecasting or projection exercise. Finally, SCAG's best event of the year is right around the corner. There's no CEHD on Thursday, October 2nd, as you may have noticed. So I do encourage folks to come here on Wednesday, October 1st for the 36th annual Southern California Demographic Workshop. So usually what we do here is a 25 or a 30-year regional plan. So you kind of do have to start with the long-run historical context. And 100 years ago, Southern California had fewer than 1 million people. There were multiple decades where the growth rate in the SCAG region was over 100%. So the growth rate that we have had in the last decade or so, 4 or 5%, looks really tiny by historical comparison. Especially because a lot of us, our formative years, our childhoods, et cetera, were back when the growth rates were particularly high. The cultural narrative and embeddedness of Southern California as a fast growth place really runs pretty deep and it really gets reified in media, Hollywood, what have you. as well. So in some sense, we're stuck in some of those older years. So that's why it was a bit of a shock after the last census when the state lost a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. But we were only a tick below the otherwise relatively stable U.S. growth rate that you see there. But frankly, we haven't been the land of fast growth for about 30 years or so. You can see this a little bit more if I kind of build this up by counties. The last several years really do stand out. I'll start here with San Bernardino. I don't know if I see any San Bernardino folks directly here, but I'm sure there are some online. Oh, yeah. San Bernardino, fast growth, certainly in the early 2000s or so, hit a little bit of a negative in population growth in 2022. I'm going to add Riverside County on top of here, had an even bigger kind of a lump there in 2004, 2005, 2006 or so, and actually has the distinction of being the only county not to have had negative population growth at all during this whole kind of COVID impacted time recently. Imperial County, a relatively small overall magnitude, but pretty similar pattern to those last two. If I layer Los Angeles County, America's largest by a wide margin, you see it really grew kind of around 2000 or so. Definitely a different trend than the Inland Empire, in that there was also a big hump of population growth in the 2010s, which we didn't see quite as much inland. That's multifamily housing, a lot of employment growth, millennial growth, what have you. I think there was a little bit of the discussion of that earlier on, but goodness, that went quite negative starting in 2020 through 2024. But that's actually back to positive by now. Orange County, kind of in the middle, a little bit mirroring LA with faster growth before, but did go negative for a couple of years there, as did Ventura. You'll notice that the last 2 years, Southern California has actually returned to positive growth, 72,000 new residents in 2023, 48,000 in 2024. To a certain degree, this is a legacy COVID impact. We're kind of back to a slow and steady to a certain degree at least. So if you can easily break this down and kind of see where it comes from. We're really reliant on foreign immigration here. In the 2010s or so, we tended to get about 67,000 people on net from mostly Latin America and Asian countries coming and settling into Southern California. That slowed to basically zero during 2021 and has crept up to almost back to where it had been in the 2010s. We tend to, every year about 400,000 people leave the region and about 300,000 other people come to the region, typically. So the net effect of that is that we tend to lose more folks to other parts of the country than we gain back. That kind of started to get a little bit more extreme, as you might have noticed or realized during the depths of the pandemic and thereafter. There was a little bit of a Cal exodus to a certain degree. But if anything, that's actually rebounded even more sharply. We're below the level of domestic migration loss than we were before, specifically in LA County. We actually have lost fewer people in LA County last year than in any year since 2013. So that's definitely kind of reversed to a certain degree. We are having fewer children. There has not been a post-COVID rebound in having children. While there was a spike in mortality and deaths, certainly during the pandemic, as we know pretty well, we're also a fair bit older than we were before. So the number of deaths is a little bit more. So all those things kind of combine to generally lower population outlook. There's a big question mark going forward, though, on immigration here, and projecting immigration looks to be increasingly difficult as we kind of embark on this next phase here for the region. Starting in 2023, the U.S. Congressional Budget Office started using a really kind of a non-typical data source for immigration. It's actually a Department of Homeland Security record. They call it Southwest Border Encounters that result in release or parole. It's not exactly a measure of immigration, but immigration is really hard to predict. So any kind of piece of information that you can gather that's calculated and gathered regularly, is something meaningful to look at. So here's what the Census Bureau had as immigration to California in 2023. You see that in 2020 it was like pretty much zero, and it kind of rebounded. Our State Department of Finance had essentially the same kind of pattern, just a little bit of a lag because of how they run some operations. But what's particularly interesting in this proxy measure, I guess you could call it, is that goodness, starting in 2023, there were a heck of a lot more Southwest border encounters resulting in release or parole. Now, what's interesting, if I take us back to this notion of balance, which is our unique role as an MPO, we were totally flummoxed as to why job growth in 2023 and 2024 kept going up in the SCAG region, even though we weren't really gaining any population. It was kind of flummoxing our roundtable of economists, who you'll hear from a little bit at regional council if you're coming there. But this seemed to be one of the strongest explanations. So we kind of identified this as one of the reasons why we seem to have an economy that kind of had kept going, job numbers that kind of had kept going, is because to a certain degree, we might have been undercounting new population. Actually, the US Census Bureau revised its immigration estimates for California quite a bit upward. After this made its rounds, the Dallas Fed did a paper on this new data source and everything. So, and there's even some controversy over this this line here being a little bit too high. They might have been double counting folks in the border states plus if they go somewhere else thereafter. So this might be a little bit too high. In fact, the State Department has not made that increase. But in any case, it started to go down pretty precipitously a little bit over a year ago in summer of 2024. So before the new administration and everything, even as well. That's all to say that this is a really volatile area. But then again, in Southern California, it's a really critical area for measuring our population growth, but also this notion of balance between people and jobs. So I'll leave it as I'll leave it as a data question, and I'll leave it as that. And pivot for just a couple of more points here on housing to kind of complement a little bit of the last presentations. You know, the population change has been pretty volatile in Southern California over the last 5 or 7 years, but housing production's actually been unprecedentedly stable. We've tended to have decades of really severe boom and bust cycles in terms of the aggregate amount of housing built in the region. But actually, for the last 10 years, the number of new housing units every year in Southern California has been between about 43,000 and 51,000 every single year. So we're kind of entering this really interesting and unusual period of stability. That being said, it ticked down in 2024, as you can see, and the 2025 data for the first half has us a shade below where we were for 2024. Certainly interest rate headwinds. I would leave it to the esteemed Mr. Randall Lewis over there to provide more detail after the meeting if some might be desired on those dynamics. But again, just to kind of return to the notion of balance, kind of in the bottom right here, over the last decade or so, you know, we've been cranking along 46,000 or so new residential units per year, but only gaining about 10,000 people per year. So gradually, you know, there is this notion that we are building more units than we are adding population, which again is a really different dynamic than the 60s, 70s, 80s or so, when we were adding way more people and not quite enough housing. So just wanted to kind of share that notion here as far as the long range picture goes. I've got one more, you know, kind of data trick here up my sleeve. In the last 5 years, housing production has actually been pretty well distributed across the 6 counties of Southern California. LA County having about 55%. LA County is about 52% of the region's population. So this actually mirrors the population distribution of the county pretty well. LA and Riverside are a tiny bit overrepresented. San Bernardino is right on. Orange and Ventura are a little lower. Although Ventura's been going gangbusters the last year with new units relative to its population size. But you have to probe pretty deeply to kind of see this. You'll often see statistics that show a pretty even split between single family housing and multifamily housing being built. The catch is that detached accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and a lot of folks here in kind of the local front desk context probably know this already, is that ADUs are usually counted as single family housing, especially the detached ones, which make up the majority. So if you do net out accessory dwelling units, you get kind of a different picture here. In the last 5 years, housing production in the region's been 49% multifamily, 28% kind of conventional single family, 24% ADU. It's still an open question. There hasn't been really great survey work done from what I can tell on who's occupying ADUs. A couple of pieces have been done in Santa Barbara County, the South Bay cities, that suggest that somewhat about half of ADUs are put on the rental market, you know, and meaningfully add to the housing stock, whereas some are for family, you know, so that does yield to unbundling. But then again, some are just, you know, for storage or for a home office. So it's a different housing product, and the data are just starting to be available so that we can kind of look at this. I'll break this down one further a little bit to kind of give a flavor of how housing type and counties combine to make up the roughly 250,000 units that we've had in the region over the last 5 years or so. And you can see some bars really stand out here. A huge share of the region's new housing in the last 5 years has been multifamily in LA County, ADUs in LA County, and single family in Riverside County. Those 3 bars make up 68% of the region's new housing units from permits over the last 5 years. The county award for the county that's kind of the most balanced across these 3 is actually Orange County. Hey, right on. I'm not actually giving awards. I'm just trying to engage the. Yeah. So we'll save those for the General Assembly, perhaps in 2026. So it's a little bit unsurprising that the city of LA has actually had the biggest gain in population over the last year that we have data for, 2024. Unincorporated Riverside County, with its high single family production, is right below that. You always see some oddballs and some interesting nuances in like who has the highest percentage change. City of Placentia actually has the highest percentage change in housing units and population. A couple developments there, and City of Blythe, the lowest change, and that's the Chuckwalla Valley State Prison closure in 2024. That's likely that you can probably attribute it to that, not only the prison closure, but all the associated industries, which had a real impact on that community there. You can see it reflected in the data. So that's the demographic update. I do want to leave you with 2 things here. The next Connect SoCal plan, or RTP-SCS, it's set to be adopted in 2028. It's under development already. One of the first steps is for us to assemble a group of experts, demographers, economists, noted and friendly housing developers, to opine on where we're going in the future, to kind of take this sensibility and feed it into the next plan. We don't have a crystal ball, but we can do the best we can with these 7 major inputs here to assess these 3 things here: employment, population, and households, and kind of put a framework together for a balanced vision for the future. And finally, again, a plug for the 36th Annual Southern California Demographic Workshop on Wednesday, October 1st. The theme this year is revisiting the intergenerational contract. We're proud to have 3 really good data-driven and research-supported panels. That's always kind of the theme of this conference. It's a little bit more analytical in nature and in focus. But this time, I'm proud to say I think we've got a really positive and inclusive message that definitely comes out of this approach of an intergenerational contract. We've got folks talking about how we support each other over life stages. Both within families and households, but also as a society in terms of school investment, things like First 5, senior care, and over the life course across demographic groups, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all kind of the theme. The keynote I will say there is a panel on immigration in Southern California's workforce, because as I mentioned earlier, a lot really, really hinges upon that when we're looking at kind of our demographic future. The keynote is none other than our very own Dowell Myers, USC professor, who has been at this for quite some time. But he's doing a reprise of his 2007 book, which is titled Immigrants and Boomers, Forging a New Social Contract for the Future of America. That was already 18 years ago. So this is a really great kind of a moment and an opportunity to revisit some of these themes. So really hoping that you all and that others can really come and be a part of this conversation. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Excellent. I will now look to members of the public who wish to speak on this particular item in person or online.
Mr. Chair, I do not see any members of the public wishing to participate online or in person.
All right, I'll move on to CEHD members. The Honorable Sheila Rossi.
Hi, thank you so very much. I appreciate the presentation. My question is, a lot of the presentation is a snapshot in time, and it's not forward looking at this point because you're in the process of developing that. But along with the changes in immigration, there is the silver tsunami that is coming. And I think that we're in the process of having all these housing bills that are going through and push for what we need from a demographic perspective without a lot of discussion on what that silver tsunami looks like in terms of housing, population, but also in home ownership, because California has the largest percentage of seniors who own multiple properties as well. And understanding that we're about to see we are seeing properties being listed. I actually went last weekend and I saw 8 properties within a 4-block region. Every single property was a senior who had owned the property for 30 years and were selling it off. So, my concern or my question is really like, what is that looking like on a horizon? And are we looking at getting those numbers in? Similarly, like you mentioned, immigration, we have a large number of universities, and the federal government just put a hold on student visas. The Boston apartment market has already seen a decline as a result of the student visa issue. They're looking at how that's going to get resolved in the next year or so as universities adapt. But then third thing in California, and especially in Southern California, is the film industry. And what is happening with the film industry is there's a movement towards AI and CGI, and it's taking away a lot of like production crews and whatnot. And so I think those are areas that I am concerned about that hasn't been part of the discussions and the conversations about population and housing.
I think you bring up some excellent points. In fact, Silver Tsunami was one of the original titles we had bandied about for the workshop. The other one was The Importance of Other People's Children. That's a great point in terms of the housing stock turnover. One interesting fact is that if you do look to our last set of projections for 2050, the average household size goes down from about 3 to about 2.55. And that's in part because it's a lot of older folks, fewer large families, a lot of just couples with no children, or an individual couple whose partner has passed away or something like that. So that does, bode a need for a different type of housing stock. But you've seen very little of the kind of the larger housing stock, baby boomer owned housing stock turning over. That probably will accelerate. We had an expert panel a couple of years ago where somebody from PPIC had a really trenchant insight. We were projecting pretty low numbers and then thought, what's going to happen if in 30 years we have 750,000 vacant housing units in LA County? They're not likely to necessarily stay vacant because we have this dynamic of people coming and going. Presumably, you're going to have some change in the domestic migration dynamic here, where people don't necessarily feel as though they have to leave. There might be some price impacts here or there. That's a bit of a more difficult, more faceted question, but I really appreciate that you bring that up. So thanks.
Thank you. The Honorable John Mears.
Thanks so much. So it's interesting to note the single-family homes being built in Riverside, and I guess that's a question of space and availability and land and all of that. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a study, many studies actually, Karen Chapley at I think Berkeley, which shows that people across the board, all colors, all races, you name it, preferences are still overwhelmingly single-family homes. I think we see that some of our public safety officers who earn very good salaries in Beverly Hills commute long distances so that they can own single family homes, even though they could certainly afford to live in apartments within a closer radius. How do you see that affecting the demographics? Is there any information or statistics about the commutes that people take? Because I'm guessing that if we don't have enough of a supply of the kinds of homes that people prefer within reasonable distances, you're going to see more people commuting like they do from Beverly Hills to Temecula or Chatsworth or Simi Valley or Santa Clarita. Are there any statistics on that? We're so concerned about commutes and the impact that has on global warming and that sort of thing. How can we measure that?
Well, you bring up an interesting point, and I remember some specific discussions with some of your city staff who come from Palmdale, Lancaster, and the high desert, which seems like a punishing commute, but it is in exchange of a commute for a large amount of space. I think I've read some of those preference surveys for single family housing versus multifamily housing. Certainly, there are a lot of perspectives in it. One facet is that they may or may not be constrained surveys. If you just ask folks which one do you want, yes, I'd certainly choose more space, but in a constrained environment with trade-offs, something that's the kind of a hedonic model or some other sense of understanding that might kind of augment the reality of it to a certain degree.
But I'm saying in the real world, we see where a lot of our employees choose to live. That's They're not constrained. And so I'm guessing, are there statistics about that? Because clearly there are people who are willing to travel long, long distances because they want to have, it's not just about where you live, it's how you live. And they want to pursue their housing preferences and are willing to do so. So does that kind of evidence exist about sort of, the commuting patterns and that sort of thing? And if there's not enough supply of the kind of homes that they would like to do, shouldn't we be focused on trying to increase the supply of those kinds of homes?
And the clear evidence exists through price, certainly as well, of well-located large single-family homes that are exorbitant and that are really desirable because they have both of those factors. Yeah, certainly. Kind of maybe out of a positive message of this, the lack of massive population growth anticipated for the future, downsizing, retiring baby boomer cohorts, could open up additional housing stock that exists today, and could be a positive overall.
As you mentioned, some of the older people who maybe are empty nesters, downsizing, that their homes could go to families who need or want the space, and they could go to either smaller homes or multifamily or whatever.
But I'll quote Dowell Myers too: "Everybody has a right to their place in their home."
Who says that?
Dowell Myers.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
thank you very much, the Honorable Jeff Wood. We're coming up on time.
I'll
It
be
might
quick.
go a little over. Don't want to stop you.
No, just kind of a general question. I think I appreciate the historic perspective. I was doing some math, and my family moved to this region from the Midwest, actually to President Allen's district 116 years ago. 6 generations of my family live in our neighboring city, many in committee member Kerr's district. So my family came and has not left. I know a lot of students, they go out of state because it's more affordable, and they don't return. I mean, I have a family member that chose to stay in Arizona. People leave the state because of a lot of things, right? Economics. We're not a very business-friendly state. All those reasons they leave. But I just wonder if you know why people come. Like, why would people come to California? I mean, our cities are great. We love our cities, but there's 49 other states that are business-friendly, that have jobs, that, I mean, why are people coming to California?
Kind of, and I'll leave some of this for maybe the economic roundtable folks at the regional council meeting. But a lot of startups and nascent industries still do seek out here, in part because it's large. There's still a talent pool. It's interesting. It's very well networked kind of a place. There are a lot of early career and mid-career kind of advantages in that regard. Frankly, the natural amenities that are embedded into the home prices and have kept a lot of us here are a major migration driver as well. I think in the future, family connections are going to be probably a higher predictor of who stays versus who goes. Especially if there's inherited or intergenerational wealth transfer through housing wealth. I myself moved to the adjacent council district in Long Beach for this job, just to give one particular example from the Midwest. But there are a wide variety of reasons. The bulk is out is about 400,000, in is about 300,000. I'm happy to share more detail on some of the migration work we've been doing, but there are still some.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. King. That's a great teaser for October 1st. We're all excited for that. Thank you for the presentation. We'll move to item number 5, agenda outlook and future agenda items. We are rapidly approaching the end of 2025. After today, we only have 2 more CEHD meetings before the end of the year. Elizabeth Carvajal, SCAG's Deputy Director of Planning and Land Use, will provide an agenda outlook and overview of future agenda items for this committee. This is a timely reminder of the purview of our committee and the work that remains. Elizabeth.
Good morning. Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Elizabeth Carvajal here. I will be very brief. At the beginning of every fiscal year, I provide you with an overview of what you can expect over the year. We also included a brief overview of each of the 3 committees, so you have a sense of the scope for each of them. So here in Community, Economic, and Human Development, we cover land use, housing, economic development. In, if I can move my slides, transportation, focus on transportation, and energy and environment focuses on energy, conservation, environment. The outlook is in your agenda packet. We have 5 meetings this year, not counting 2 joint policy committee meetings. The items are focused on the topics you all selected when you did the survey a couple of years ago. Those are the items we didn't get to, as well as the presidential priorities. So 5 meetings. Look forward to robust discussions. Again, at the beginning of each meeting, if there's a recommendation you want to make, you raise your hand, let the chair know, and we can evaluate whether we can accommodate that. I will leave it at that unless you have any questions for me.
Thank you. I will ask first if there are any members of the public who wish to speak or comment on this item.
Mr. Chair, I don't see any members of the public wishing to participate in person.
All right, now I'll turn to committee members. Seeing none in person and seeing none online, thank you very much for the report, and we will continue. I'll move on to the chair's report. First of all, a big thank you to all of you for being here. I know a lot of people driving here took longer than a quick Dodger game. So I know that is an issue and it means a lot. We all have lots of things to do, and thank you for those online as well. Want to recognize our brand new CEHD committee members. First of all, the Honorable Victoria Garcia from San Fernando. Next meeting will be the speeches. The Honorable Sheila Rossi from South Pasadena. The Honorable Valerie Vanderveer from San Jacinto. I don't see. Oh, she's online. The Honorable Betty Martinez Franco from Irvine. And the Honorable Megan Kerr, who led us in the Pledge of Allegiance, from our president in Long Beach. Thank you all. The SCAG Brookings Metro study, SCAG recently released a joint report with Brookings Metro, Good Data, Stronger Tribes, Overcoming Native American Data Challenges in Southern California. Reliable data is essential for effective policymaking and community well-being, yet Native American tribes continue to face systematic challenges that undermine governance and sovereignty. This report examines persistent barriers to reliable data for Native American tribes in the SCAG region and outlines a regional roadmap for change. Importantly, this work builds directly on SCAG's inclusive economic recovery strategy. The IERS laid out more than 50 recommendations to advance an equitable recovery across housing, transportation, workforce, and economic development. This work was made possible by State Senator Susan Rubio, who secured a $3.5 million state funding for this. We thank the senator and thank Senator Rubio for her leadership, which has allowed SCAG to move from planning to implementation, including commissioning this first of its kind analysis on tribal data challenges in our region. For more information, this report can be found on the SCAG's website. I'll now turn it over to our staff report. John, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As SCAG's Dr. Kevin Kane mentioned, registration is now open for SCAG's 36th Annual Demographic Workshop, which will be held in person at our office in downtown Los Angeles and online on October 1st, 2025, starting at 9 a.m. Online registration closes Friday, September 26th. The event is free for elected officials and city managers in the region. And for additional details about the event or to register, please visit the 2025 Southern California Demographic Workshop page on SCAG's website. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn over to member announcements. Seeing none in the room, any online? Seeing none. We'll now move to adjournment so we can keep this on time, allow you to get some lunch. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, November 6th, 2025. Thank you all for being here, for your participation. The meeting is now adjourned.